I'm David Gilbert, and I am chair of the Global Experiential Advisory Board for GALENOS, and I chair a group of 10 very diverse, richly experienced people who have been recruited for this project to oversee co-production or patient and patient engagement, both for the overall program itself and particular tasks during it, but crucially for how we involve patients, carers, users, what we're calling experiential advisors, in each of the living systematic reviews themselves. So the idea originally was this would be an equivalent advisory group to what are called experts, but we bring our own expertise. So originally it was convened or viewed as a governance group, an oversight group, a strategic group who would develop a strategy for co-production across GALENOS with the other groups, and also oversee the involvement of people who get stuck in and do some of the living systematic reviews, and we'll come on to how we're thinking about that in a minute. We have a wider bank of people who applied to be on the glebe but were unsuccessful, who we envisage about 80 of them from I think 60 different countries, who we envisaged as what we call a people bank or experiential advisor group, who would be the doers. Pragmatism means that, and also for learning, we thought it would be good for each of the glebe members to be involved in each of the living systematic reviews that takes place from now on, to learn about the process so they were involved and could pass on that learning. So we build some capacity in the wider group, and we experiment with what it means to do true co-production in not just research, not just meta-analyses, not just systematic reviews, but living systematic reviews. So what we're planning, we've just heard the new 5 living systematic reviews suggested, into which we've had some input and ranking to see whether they're relevant for patients. But we're going to experiment, it looks like, with 2 members of the glebe in each of the 5. The maths works out. There are 5 reviews with 2 people each, there are 10 of us. Some of us are more experienced in terms of being involved in research or even systematic reviews. Some are less experienced but bring a different sort of expertise, a different sort of angle. So I think what we'll be discussing is how we allocate the 10 people, how we capture the learning for future cohorts so we can spread that learning and say we did this right, did this wrong. And I think there's some interesting thinking, we can do some more nuanced thinking about what it means for somebody, quote, with lived experience, or someone with mental health conditions, to be on a living systematic review, often without direct experience of the condition or the question or the mechanism being discussed, but bringing in their own questions, their own angles, their own sense as advisors, as partners. So that's something I'm quite interested in developing thinking on. I've been really interested over the last 10 years of the rise of what we've dubbed patient leadership or lived experience leadership, which is basically those who've been through stuff, know stuff, can change stuff. And as I've grown that work and done a lot of training, there's a lot of myths about what people should bring. So the 2 main forms of engagement are usually give your feedback on your, quote, own lived experience, or to be stuffed into a meeting to become a representative. And what we're trying to do here, I think, is something in the middle. Something that's about how can patients who've processed, reflected on their experience, got a PhD, if you like, in difficult stuff, can reflect and process it, and by dint of that experience with additional support, how to deal with power, how to deal with their own triggering when they're in the room with their psychiatrist, how they can, with the knowledge of context, bring a strategic view. Now, in service design and delivery, which is easier, I think. Maybe that's where I've got my experience. My hypothesis is that because all those with mental health conditions have been broken or damaged in some way, that our relationship with ourself, our relationship with others, our relationship with society has been broken. Therefore, we foreground trusting, healing relationships and humanity because that's how we heal. That's the lens we bring. We foreground relational care. And because we've been through a fragmented system, whether we've had schizophrenia or depression or self-harm or whatever, we've also been experienced a disconnected system. And therefore, when we come to co-design in the health care delivery field, we'll bring questions of, well, where is this going in terms of improving shared decision making or improving the relationship between health and social care? So we bring questions that are collated or collected or coalesced around particular facets of what relevance means. If you lift that into a living systematic review, it's a little bit more complicated because you're removed from saying, you might come into a review on depression and say, how is this relevant? The GALENOS project is looking at underlying mechanisms, for instance, how exercise affects the brain rather than is exercise a good thing? It's quite subtle. So I think what we need to talk about in the glebe is how and when are people involved, in which bits. And we're coming to a view in this meeting about that there are critical moments at which we should be involved. And they're all about how do we make this as relevant as possible for those people who will suffer from that. So as somebody with depression, I might be the experiential advisor on something with PTSD and not have direct experience, but I can ask questions, is this relevant? Why is it relevant? How is it relevant? How is it relevant for access to final products from the research? And I think that's the challenge, and I think what we've got here is a chance to really look at, in quite a nuanced way, which I've never seen done. What does it mean to be asked to give an experience from one's own lived experience perspective at a strategic level in a living systematic review? And I think that's really exciting. How can we be strategic partners in the process and bring others with us? I think many of the conversations I have around involvement of people are still pretty trite, pretty glib, get stuck in something. So A, it's a different role. B, there's actually quite an interesting question here. What I love is that everyone's been curious, really interested. Maybe that's the academic world. I know the academic world can be cruel and competitive, but people here are really curious as to how this is going to work. And I think there's lots of goodwill on both sides.